What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hackness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Elise Keith, and we speak about meetings and meeting culture and how we can have better meetings by design. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, why don't you visit workshops.work and download my free one-page summary. And now, lean back and enjoy the show. Hello, Elise, and welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Me too. Learning about meeting culture.
Meeting culture is fascinating, right?
Absolutely. One of my favorite topics. And before we get there, I always start with the same question. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator?
You know, I actually don't.
And this is a reply that I often receive. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I do. So one of the things that makes what we do different is you could not hire us to come facilitate your session, right? If you needed to do strategic planning or team building or whatnot, we have so many wonderful friends we would love to refer you to, but that's not what we do. So we facilitate our own work. And in that, we are like any other company running a business, trying to do good work that goes out and trains and works with people. And in fact, we're like people within their companies who try to lead meetings to make everything go, right? Facilitators are everywhere.
Wonderful. So where does then your fascination or your passion even for meetings come from?
So we began our company 10 years ago when we looked at what was happening with our clients. So at the time we did software for international organizations that were trying to collaborate online. And we had the software where they could put their documents and where they could send their email and all of these things. And we thought, oh, great, we're really helping them collaborate. And then I went and visited all of these clients and I realized that all the action took place in the meetings. And nothing that we were doing in the software was helping that. And then when I came back to my office and, I had gone out and I had seen how these organizations that were bringing people together from all over the world had used a well-facilitated process to reach very hard decisions that like shifted the economy, right? Like this is the standard for how wide roads are going to be. And we all agree. And it's going to work in China and India and Brazil and everywhere. Big deals. And they ran through a facilitated meeting and they're like, yes, okay, good. We're done. And I went back to my office and my team was like, well, what color should the logo be? And there was this standstill, and it was completely, yes, it's a decision that matters, but not really. Right. And as a group, we're all supposedly on the same team. And we couldn't collaborate nearly as effectively as these folks from separate countries, separate companies could when paired with an effective facilitated process. And that insight, that watching what happens when you introduce a well-facilitated structure for teams was just completely eye-opening. And facilitation, the ability to help a group make sense of what they need and come to a decision and discussion is just a superpower. So, of course, it's fascinating. Why would you not want to be part of that, right?
Absolutely. And the one question that pops up in my mind when I hear you speaking about the structure and the facilitated meeting. So, for you, what is more important, the structure of a meeting or the facilitation of the structure?
For me, it's the structure. And here's why. I believe that facilitation literacy and innovation literacy should become commonplace so that you don't need a dedicated facilitator in every room to be able to effectively use a structure. I think you do need facilitators when it gets really hard, when the group gets quite big. But I think everyone in business in the modern world should have basic facilitation skills and be able to manage the smaller conversations.
And for that, you need a structure you can rely on that is bulletproof so that the actual facilitation skill for the structure is not as difficult to learn.
That's right. You don't have to be a master to walk a group through a lean coffee, right? You have to be able to use a timer and count votes. And follow a script. You need to be able to do those things, and most people can. They need to be, encouraged to do so, and they need some practice, but they don't need, days of in-depth facilitation training to be able to run that and get a great result.
And maybe they also need either the courage or the permission or the ability to really make sure that everyone respects the timer.
Well, and that's where we get back to that original question, right? What's the culture?
Mm-hmm.
And in companies and environments where those things are expectations, right? We are going to support one another. We meet effectively. We use this structure. That mandate's in place.
Mm-hmm.
And, you can see people rotating in and out of things like the meeting leadership as just a part of how they work. It's part of their way of working, and it's part of their leadership development path.
So what would be your silver bullet to make sure that people in a meeting really respect this timing and the time boxed topic? Because I think that is something that many facilitators struggle with. How do I interrupt these people who don't stop speaking?
So actually, I train this. So we run meeting culture transformation programs. Mm-hmm. And if a silver bullet could have 3 phases.
Yes, please.
That would be helpful. So it begins by the team creating some foundational agreements, right? Mm-hmm. They state out loud their expectations for each other. That's step 1. Step 2, they decide on a structure. Mm-hmm. And ideally, they have either selected one or they've co-created it themselves. So there's ownership of the structure from the team. And then the third step is they create what we call a yellow card ritual. Mm-hmm. So it's some way in which the team agrees that anyone has agency to say, whoa, hold on, we're off the rails. Mm-hmm. So at Heiligenfeld, they have a Tingsha bells they ring whenever they think the conversation has become misaligned with the purpose of the group and their higher purpose. Other teams will do Elmo. They'll do, some of those kinds of things. So they agree on basically code words that take that responsibility for keeping the group on track as away from being just something the facilitator's meant to do and something that the team is in charge of.
Wonderful. And this is easily something that a facilitator working with a new group can agree upon in the beginning, just as the ground rules.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right. If this gets off the rails today, here's your sign, right? I've seen clever, wonderful things, actually, even in an online setting where they have cards or, clapboards that you send out to everybody in advance that they can hold up, and totally fun.
Love that. I always wonder why many managers have the impression that they have to facilitate the meetings themselves just because they're inviting to these meetings. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the idea of having rotating facilitation in a meeting is wrong. And I would love to hear your opinion or your experience on that.
We actually just wrote an article about the 5 things we think every company should do, and rotating that responsibility is one of them. Yeah, absolutely, completely. And I think we need to give managers and bosses so many margins of grace for a couple of reasons. Even though as you work your way up the corporate ladder, you spend more and more of your day in meetings. Some executives will spend up to 23 hours a week in meetings. We know from studies that fewer than 25% of them have ever received any training of any kind. So the way in which they have learned to run meetings is by going to other meetings throughout their whole career.
Uh-oh.
Right. Which they saw run by their boss, who also had not been trained. And many of the hierarchical business structures that we have in place were, set up in the Taylor era, and they're command and control oriented, right? They're very much aligned with supply chain and efficiency and drumming out anything unnecessary, like other people talking.
Or emotions and feelings.
Yes, all of these inconvenient, ineffective things, right? So those meeting structures came out of that era. And very few people have been trained in things that we see as modern facilitation. So if you've got somebody who is doing exactly what they've seen everybody else do and has no real experience of anything different except for when the magical facilitator comes for the one-day workshop, you become to believe that that's something magical facilitators do, but it's irrelevant to my business day.
Yeah.
So that I completely agree that you should be rotating that leadership, but it requires establishing some level of comfort and some amount of skill that these are things that we do.
So is the sum of collective comfort and skill then what you would call a meeting culture?
And practice. Yeah. Every organization has a way that they meet. Mm-hmm. And many of them are really ad hoc, and they've grown up organically like fungus. I mean, it's really unpleasant. Not that fungus is always unpleasant, but you know what I mean. And then there are organizations who have designed their meetings, right? They said, okay, these are the structures we're going to use. We're going to hold these kinds of meetings every quarter, these kinds every week, and here's how they run. And then you practice and you iterate. And that becomes a very strong, very productive, and often very joyful meeting culture.
Yeah. It seems to me sometimes as if meetings are just a fantastic excuse to get away from the desk to actually do the difficult work and to take these decisions. And that although everyone loves to complain about meetings, I once heard the fantastic quote, "The one thing that is even worse than sitting in a meeting is not being invited to a meeting."
Yeah.
So how do we get out of this catch-22?
So some of that, and it's especially bad right now, really bad right now, because I think it's something like 67% of the major corporations had big layoffs in the last year. And that means that what they've done is they've reorganized the people who remain into brand new teams. So you've got most of business world is working in brand new teams. And as anybody who does team formation and team building knows, that forming, storming kind of phase is a big deal. And what else happened was as they reformed, they lost their intrinsic understanding of who gets to make the decision and how decisions are made, which, when you're dealing with massive uncertainty about who has the authority in an increasingly complex dynamic environment with a team that you don't fully yet trust because you don't have well-established ways of working, then what you get is ad hoc meetings. And ad hoc meetings are a way to be doing something that feels like you're asserting some amount of control over the situation and reduce your stress level.
The illusion of control.
Well, yeah. And you are completely right. One of the biggest complaints is FOMO, right? We know we don't need all of these people in the meeting, but everybody is terrified of missing out.
Especially in times of remote work, where you cannot just sneak into someone's office and ask, so how did it go?
Right. Exactly.
What did they decide?
Right. And one of the key habits of any effective meeting culture is taking notes. I mean, so simple, right? This is how it went. Here's what we decided. Vastly underused. Very few companies have a rule about meeting notes or anywhere where you can reliably find them.
Meeting minutes.
Yeah.
I think this could be an entire episode as such, because I have the impression that it depends really on the organizational culture, whereas meeting minutes are a means to exert or show power. Oh, I have access to the meeting minutes, so I am important. I have this power of information. And other cultures treat meeting minutes as a way to include everyone and to reduce the size of the people who actually have to be in meetings.
Right.
So what is the best way, from your experience, to to go about meeting minutes, also not to make them so long that actually nobody reads them and that they're basically useless?
So I'm a huge fan of transparency because I think that you've hired people to help do good work for your business, and withholding information from them that lets them make good decisions about how to do that work is just dumb. So I think that meeting minutes should be as widely available as is practical. Mm-hmm. And there is definitely an art to trying to figure out how to organize your communication architecture so that you don't drown people in information. But one of the things about the minutes themselves is, scannable decisions and next steps at the very top, right? Like the bottom line up front, right? Put the most important stuff up top, and then all of the interesting context stuff, right? Here's the big announcement. Here's the document where you can go read more below. And that lets someone who's busy go, okay, I've got the gist. I'm good, and let it go. Or, they did this, what? And then dive in. But you don't have to be there to get all that information. And in a team like mine, we're a fairly small company. It's crucial because I need to understand what's happening with, the sales team and the development team, but I'm not going to go to all those meetings. So I don't have to.
Wonderful. So what is your meeting routine in your own company, if I may ask?
Yeah, we have a weekly and quarterly cadence for all of our core team things. So we have on Mondays, we kick off activity on the sales and marketing front just to make sure we're clear on what needs to happen for the week. And on Fridays, we review all of the books. We review, comings and goings in terms of staff and celebrate victories and do all of that. So we have basically cappers that way. We operate in an open book fashion. So everybody sees all the numbers all the time.
Wonderful.
Yep. And then the rest of our meetings are primarily in service of the work. So every one of our programs is fully designed, right? Like if you're going to do a new sale, you start here and then you do this and then you do that. And it's all templated and ready to go.
That's where the background in software, I think, comes from.
That helps, but you don't need to have a software background to design the structures of your meetings and put them somewhere people can reuse them. I actually saw that done best in food services businesses.
Oh, why that?
Zingerman's does a fabulous job with this. And some of the other folks who run things like teal organizations and whatnot, they have a way in which they run their weekly meeting, and it works the same for all of the distributed teams. And the staff members take turns facilitating. So when I went and observed for my book, it was a hostess running the weekly staff meeting and going over the finances for their largest restaurant.
Wonderful. And it actually makes it so much easier to have the same meeting structure all across an organization because everyone can run through the same onboarding or training or however you want to call it.
Right. And it makes transferability between teams. So all those problems we have in companies where, the silos can't work together because they're dealing with different kinds of information and different ways of communicating or making decisions, right? Like that all gets so much easier.
Yeah.
And just because you're using the same structure doesn't mean it's identical.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think of something like Mary Kay or Tupperware parties or whatever, like there's Tupperware parties in India and London and everywhere. And it's not like every single one of those runs exactly the same, but they've got a core. Yeah. You're going to do appetizers. You're going to do a game. You're going to look at some Tupperware. You're going to sell some things.
I love it. And I have two questions in my mind now, and I try not to forget them. One is, assuming there's one division or a well-functioning team in an organization, and they have this great meeting culture, is it something that can grow across an organization organically, naturally, or is it something that has to start from a reorganization or rethinking of the entire organizational culture before you can get to the individual meetings?
That's a great question. And the honest answer is I'm I'm not entirely sure. The way I have seen it work has been that if you've got a well-functioning team, they can spread their awesomeness to similar functional teams, right? So if you've got developers, they can teach other developers. But what's happening in the development group rarely then translates to the sales team or the HR department. And which is okay, right? So when we look at meeting performance, we actually did a piece of work where we looked at it across groups and looked at these practices at different levels of maturity. And that bit where you get the pockets is a level 3, where the pockets know how to do their thing, but it's not necessarily matching up with other people's things. And that next level, I believe, needs centralized help, right? You've got to have some agreed upon principles, some agreed upon unifying structures for that cross-functional stuff to work as well.
And I would be curious to hear from you what these key identifiers would be, because I think one of the biggest problems most organizations have is that their meetings are read out emails.
Isn't that awful?
An entire department sit there wasting their time listening to this one person reading out an email.
Yeah, that's just bad and unfortunate. And I haven't seen any company that actually takes their meetings on where that lives. That dies so fast because it's so ineffective. So, principles wise, we encourage people to create their own. And what you can see when you look at the companies that have done this on their own is that they have radically different principles. And those principles tend to reflect strongly the things you see in the mission, vision, and value statement, right? So let's take Amazon for an example. Amazon's mission, vision, and values are all about aggressive growth. Move fast, take over, get her done, right? Own it. Their meeting rules are things like the no PowerPoint rule, which is designed to solve the problem you just mentioned, but it's also designed to increase the speed at which they can make high quality decisions. So it's all about high velocity decision making. So they can look at an opportunity, decide yes, no, go, and seize it before anybody else is even out of bed, right? That's why they have that practice. One of their other practices is the 2 pizza rule, which says, you should have no more than 8 people in a meeting. And that one is pretty smart if you're not going to train people to facilitate. Because it's really hard to run an effective meeting with more than 8 people if you have no facilitation skills.
Yeah.
So, that's about fast, nimble, light. Whereas if you look at, Heiligenfeld or some of these other companies, their rules are things like speak from your heart. Brene Brown's rules are come with authenticity. And if you need to, write yourself a permission slip so that you can come to this rumble and say what needs to be said. Completely different rules.
How important do you consider the check-in in the beginning, that everyone gets their voice heard as early as possible?
First 5 minutes, critical. Yeah, in some way or another. Absolutely. It's psychologically, you're dealing with transition, right? So even if you don't actually care about the people as people, which is too bad, you really should. But let's just say you just want to get the work done. Well, you can't have a meeting of the minds if the minds aren't in the meeting. And if you don't do that work to help them transition into the room, they're still thinking about their email or their missed lunch or the last meeting they just ran from, and you're talking to yourself. It's a waste of time.
Could it then be an analogy to the 2 pizza rule in the physical space? Could it be then a rule of thumb for the virtual space that if the entire group cannot check in 5 minutes, the group is too large?
It could. I know you as a facilitator who's done virtual spaces can find a way to make more than 5 people check in the first 5 minutes, right? Like they don't all have to actually speak to all contribute. And I think that you can do that in the room or online. There are all kinds of ways to get people actively involved.
That's true. Even if it's just in breakout groups when the group is too large.
Yeah, do a chatterfall, right?
Yeah.
What are we thinking about this? What are we thinking about that? I watch my kids, they're doing remote school because we're all still shut down. And their teacher does a poll every time. Everybody says hi and they do a poll, and then they giggle about, who prefers snowmen over whatever it is. So,
facilitating educator, I love that.
If you look at what teachers do and what facilitators do, there's an awful lot of overlap.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And especially in those little grades.
Yeah, true. In the higher grades, unfortunately, I think the facilitating teacher is a rare species.
Yeah.
But this is for another episode.
Hi, this is Andrew. I'm a facilitator and head of customer success at Session Lab, the dynamic workshop planner tool. More than 30,000 facilitators, trainers, and coaches use our workshop planner tool and save time and effort in the design process. So, how do they do it? Our drag and drop agenda builder makes it easy to transform your ideas into high-quality workshops, and the timing of your agenda automatically updates when you make changes. You can collaborate in real time with your colleagues and easily share professional-looking printouts with your clients. And if you need inspiration, you can check out our library of more than 500 activities and exercises and simply drag the ones you need right into your workshop agenda. So check out Session Lab to save time and effort in your workshop design process. And now get your first 2 months of Session Lab Pro absolutely free at sessionlab.com/workshopswork.
It often feels to me that the virtual space or online collaboration meeting space is just an amplifier of what was wrong or what was going on in the physical space. Do you think that we can have functioning online meetings if we had dysfunctional offline meetings?
There is a colleague, an academic colleague of ours, Dr. Joe Allen, who looked at this through 2020 specifically. And his book is coming out next month. So I'm very excited about it, called Suddenly Virtual. And they dug specifically into this question because for the longest time, there was a question about, is it okay to even meet online, or do you have to get into the room? Or do you need to, could you meet on the phone if you had to and whatnot? And what they discovered was that video conference meetings, so not phone meetings, but video conference meetings are equally as effective as their on-land counterparts. Mm. And that means equally effective. So if you ran terrible meetings before, you still run terrible meetings. Do them on video now. Now, if you took a terrible meeting and you tried to do it over the phone, it was a complete bust. Complete loss of time. So at least you get that. Now, I have heard of several teams where the move to online has actually helped them become more human. It has, in fact, helped them become better facilitators and more inclusive.
Why do you think is that?
I think a couple of things happened. I think people were desperate to stay in touch. They lost the water cooler. So you saw lots of team happy hours and coffee chats and things coming up. I think these boxes make us all the same size. It's very hard to hide in the back of the room. So there's some equalization of power, the short woman and the tall man.
Yeah.
That goes away, right? And I think people their whole way of working was disrupted. And they were like, oh my gosh, what do we do? How do we meet online? Mm-hmm. And then when they started searching for how do I meet online, they found things written by facilitators.
Our time to shine.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bring it. Time to shift it all. Yeah.
I'm curious about the difference between a phone meeting and a video meeting where everyone's camera is off. And I wonder, somehow I have the impression that there's a difference and I cannot put my finger on it. And maybe you can. And then maybe to even add another layer, there are now these avatar-based video conferencing tools.
Yeah, the funky VR things and the little guys that move around.
Exactly, or even without VR, there's Theo, for instance, where you just have an avatar. So it's basically a phone call and still it feels different. Where does this difference come from? Or maybe you don't see it.
I do. I think that you should definitely interview some of the researchers who are looking at this specific question, right? But the psychological things you're dealing with are what we call media richness theory, right? So it has to do with how our brains interpret communication information, right? And it's one of the reasons why even on video conference, you are going to get a better result if you turn off your self view. Because our brains are just not meant to handle trying to regulate our own appearance and our own things while also paying attention to other people and communicating. So we are wired to look at, those of us who can, right? There are people who can't, but wired to look at other people's faces and react to that. And the minute you lose the visual stimulation, so all the video's off or you're just on the phone, right? Then you look for something else to fill that field.
And then you get
all that
distracted.
You get all that multitasking, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe the difference between a video call with all cameras off, which doesn't deserve the name, and a phone conference is maybe also because you're stuck to your computer. So at least you cannot walk around, because with a phone conference, then suddenly you start to wash the dishes or hang the clothes or whatever.
Yeah. And there are some meetings where that's actually great, like where you go on the phone and you walk. And those are the business equivalent of when you do that same thing when you're talking to your friend or your mom or whatever, right? Like you're just working through all this stuff and you're walking in nature and you're talking it through. And those are fabulously useful for some of those. We're trying to make sense of a thing. And just work it out loud. Like those meetings are great done audio only while walking. But we're trying to track progress. We're trying to disseminate important information. We're trying to make a decision. Yeah, not so much.
Yeah. What is the one thing you think that most people get wrong about meetings?
One thing? Not preparing, taking them for granted. Yep.
And then when it comes to preparation, I totally agree. And I think if people would know how much preparation actually a good meeting takes, there would be less meetings anyway, and would think twice whether we put this into our calendars or not.
Yes, absolutely.
Who is then preparing the meeting? Is it the person facilitating it, or is it the person calling for the meeting, or is it a collaboration of those two?
It could be a collaboration of those two. It could be the entire team. It really depends on the structure. So one of the secrets, I believe, to success on this front, right? Because if you look at what it actually takes to prepare an effective meeting, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, right? And if you're talking about executives who have 23 hours of meetings a week, there's no way they're doing all that work for every one of those meetings. So how do you succeed? You prepare them in advance. You prepare standard structures once, right? You design your way of working. This meeting runs this way, so that when it shows up on your calendar, the amount of prep you have to do is, how do I adjust this for what's happening right now? Not how do I design something from scratch? How do I update the information for today, as opposed to what might happen there and what are all of our possibilities, and let's go.
And then it makes even more sense to have one meeting structure for an entire organization, because then it's one for a specific type of meeting, I guess, for the entire organization.
Yes, because you've centralized, you get your best possible design, right?
Yeah.
You do that design work once, and then everybody iterates on it. And all of a sudden, you've massively freed so much budget and so much time. And every one of the meetings is actually more effective.
Yeah. And everyone can better prepare because they know what's going to come. It takes away a lot of anxiety, especially of people who need structure and to prepare. Yeah. I always like to compare people who don't prepare their meetings with those who invite guests for dinner and expect them to bring their own food.
That's right. Yeah. Let me give you, or, hey, come to my house for dinner. Let me walk you through my pantry and tell you about all the ingredients. And you can sit there and just listen to me for a while. Yeah. It's so boring. Exactly. It's very much like that. Right. And I think your point about people who need that structure, we talk often about how designing the meeting system makes the executive time more valuable. But the real key value is exactly what you just said, which is the people who are more introverted, who are more junior, all of these things. All of a sudden, when it's clear how you affect decision making, how you participate in a room and can influence what's happening, and you know what to expect in advance, you get to play, right? They're unlocked because how to get into the game and where the game's at and what happens in the game is completely clear.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to unleash and develop your whole team and you're tired of micromanaging or having things go off the rails and all of that, this is an enormously powerful way to do that.
Do you have a favorite meeting item that really gets the people engaged and thinking about the topic? Is there an exercise you would suggest a team that is just rethinking their meeting culture?
I have a bunch that I like to run, but I think one of the simplest, the two simplest, I like to do basically a rotating flip chart thing, right? Mm-hmm. So you ask all the provocative questions and then have them move through. And I especially like to do it when I've maximized for divergence in the group. So you have all of the people who normally are in charge and think the meetings are already great in one group, and the people who are not in charge and don't think that in another group. And then as they rotate through, they get to see each other's answers.
And before you walk me and the audience through this exercise, how it works in detail, I read it in this, I think the book is called The Science of Meetings, where the author cites a research saying that we enjoy conversations more the more speaking time we have. And this is true just for us as human beings. So since most managers, when they invite to a meeting, they speak most. So at the end, they walk out of the meeting and think, oh, that was brilliant. What a wonderful conversation we had.
That's right. It's called the leadership blind spot. And it's just a foundational part of being human. And it's one of the reasons that bad meetings persist in corporations generation after generation, because by the time somebody gets into management, they're like, oh, I used to think these were terrible, but now I see they aren't so bad.
True. And as
clearly these people are too junior to know what's good for them.
Yeah. And true, and as they move up the hierarchical ladder, they get the confidence to speak more and more in meetings. So they actually grow into this role in appreciating these bad meetings more.
Yeah. So the keys to what we call it's perceived meeting quality. So whether you as an individual feel like this was a good use of your time, it's you knew basically what to expect walking in, and you had your expectations met, and you had a chance to participate. So the manager every single time, check, that was great.
Yeah. So how does this rotating flip chart exercise work?
So that exercise, it goes by rotating flip chart or carousel, so you may have heard it by any number of these names, but you break the group into smaller groups, and each group has a drawing space in which they put in their answers for a question. So I will ask them things like, what do we already do really well in our meetings? Or what would make our meetings more fun? Or what are some things we already know we should do, but we're not, some of those kinds of things. And each breakout group fills in as much as they can, and then the timer's up, and then you have them rotate to the next chart. And when they get to the next chart, it's already, filled out. And their mission is to put a green check mark next to anything they agree with, put a, hey, I don't think so, and a comment on anything that they don't, and then add.
And then they move through all
through
the
all of the, exactly. And with that, you've got this massive collection of this is what we believe.
Mm.
And I always have the people who think meetings are great start with, here's everything we're already doing really great. And then I immediately rotate them to, here's everything we're doing terribly that's awful, that was filled out by the group that doesn't like meetings.
Mm.
So they immediately get to see a contrasting viewpoint because they're the people with the most power over
and
what's going on.
How do you reveal then their blind spot? So how open are they to actually accept that these people just don't get it?
That's a great question because I don't know that it's effective to change everybody's mind. Facilitation, no matter how clever the exercise is. So actually what we do is we build on that and create agreements over, given all of these things, what are the top 5 things we should be trying next?
Mm.
Right. So, and then the other exercise that I really like that we use to then build on all of those it's called ritual descent. Do you know that one?
No.
It's a similar kind of idea. So again, you break the group into teams and each team develops a proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And in our case, it's how our meetings ought to run. And then one person from that team is the ambassador.
Mm-hmm. And
they go and they present their proposal to the next team.
Mm-hmm.
And then it works very much like a troika consulting, right? So they'll turn their back while the people talk about everything they liked and didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
And then they move to the next one. And ideally, they're incorporating some of what they heard and they're refining their presentation every time.
Mm.
And at the same time, the rest of their team is hearing everybody else's proposals as they rotate through. And so when you finally get back, this person has gotten feedback on their proposal, and this team has seen everybody else's proposal, and they work together to improve it.
Wonderful. I love it. And I can imagine that in the online space, it can work even more effectively when people who are turning their back, they're turning their camera off. And then you get this intimacy somehow because you don't feel observed.
Absolutely. And the other thing that's really wonderful in the online space is that the work that they did is probably digital,
mm-hmm.
which means it actually survives the workshop. It comes out.
Don't fall off the wall.
Exactly. It survives the workshop and they can actually use it, right? They've worked on something they can then iterate on following the call. So yeah, that's easy. They don't have to actually move the team. They just point them to a different online space,
Yeah. Wonderful. Although you mentioned in the very beginning that you have actually worked online for decades already. And still I wonder, do you think there is something we've learned from online meetings that we can apply to offline meetings?
Probably.
Can you think of something?
The thing that I think we've done in the online space that weren't doing as successfully on land is rapid experimentation.
Mm.
So people have played very successfully and quite a lot online in a way that, and shared, right? Like facilitators are coming together and showing each other things and trying things together in a way they never were before. It was very proprietary before. So that's a huge bonus. I think the online world has also required many facilitators to loosen up.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you just can't control as much when you send folks off into breakout rooms.
Yeah.
So how do you simplify your instructions? How do you get to the essence of it? How do you trust the group even more than you already thought you were trusting the group?
How do you cut out all the noise because everything just takes longer online? Absolutely,
right. How do you be okay with the fact that not everybody's going to be successful in this environment? Right? It's huge, but you do have to breathe and go, I'm sorry that didn't work for you. Let's pair you up with a friend.
Yeah.
And be okay with it because you can't actually do anything about it. So I think that's really good. And then I think the online world does something that has always driven me crazy about on-land sticky note facilitated sessions, which is it gives you an actual tangible result that you can use without hours and hours of scribe, right? So I think there's a lot you can do that gives you more intelligent use of the work product when you do digital capture.
Yeah, and more sustainable outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is that what you found?
Yeah. I think for me, the breakout rooms are still magic. And I wonder whether we can actually replicate that in the on-land world, as you call it. I like that. I copy that. The intimacy of a breakout room where you are guaranteed amongst yourself without anyone listening.
Yeah.
We just cannot replicate it. And I think the effect of that is magic. And I think that many teams don't use the opportunity of that enough. And I wonder whether it's the insecurity of how to use breakout rooms. So whether it's a technical insecurity or whether it's a control insecurity that, if I send them out, I don't know what they're going to talk about. And maybe,
it's funny though. I did a series of workshops with a range of people, and I had a professor come on, and he said, do we have to use breakout rooms? Because my class hates breakouts. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me? Everybody loves breakouts, don't they? And what I found as we ran these workshops over time is that they're polarizing, actually. So I know most facilitators and most people who actually continue to stay on at the end of the session and talk to the facilitators. People who actually give us feedback say they love it. But I have noticed because we did a whole bunch of public workshops this last year, that as we're going along, we say, okay, now we're going to break out into smaller teams, and I will watch my attendance drop. Yeah. There are people who are not interested in that level of intimacy. They're not there to share their thing, so.
Yeah. And it might also be just shyness.
Could be. Mm-hmm.
So, and then this pressure, oh my goodness, I haven't paid attention now. I need to be in a breakout group and talk about the content. I better leave.
Yeah, there's some of that. And I think my professor friend was saying his students are like, yeah, we only have so much time. We are here to learn the material. We weren't here to talk about our feelings about the material. I don't want to learn from that guy. I want to learn from you. Let's go. So it was kind of fascinating.
Yeah. And this is a totally different layer of problematic that you need to address for your students, that they don't see the opportunity of learning from peers. But that's a different topic.
Yeah. So, I think that's part of what I was saying earlier, though, about, just having to roll with it. Because the expectation gap between different people coming from different environments, I believe, has widened quite a bit, especially actually in the online facilitation community, where we've spent a lot of the last year getting together and playing with all kinds of cool methods and rich interaction. I notice when online facilitators come to my sessions, they get really tweaked if there isn't a breakout room within the first 10 minutes. It's like this is a business topic. I'm sorry. So it's fascinating to watch that.
Yeah. Very true. Before we close, I would like to come back to one thing that we touched a little bit, but we didn't go into depth. And that's what I perceive another big struggle challenge to many facilitators. We talked about the dominant people and to calm them down and to make sure that they don't take all the space. What is your strategy to include the lower voices of those who might not turn their camera on, they're shy, they don't want to speak up?
So often when I'm working with a team, it's a business goal-oriented activity. So one of the first things we do is we set expectations, way in advance. Your cameras will be on, you will be speaking, all of that, so that the rules of the game are clear walking in. In public workshops where people just show up and they're volunteers and they can leave, I don't enforce things. I encourage them. And then I work really hard to do something completely non-threatening first. Work in tiny groups and talk about bands you like. Things that are easy and safe. What's your name? Things they can completely win at. And then as we get into more difficult things, how can you find alternate ways of providing the input, right? Use one-to-all or structures like that so they don't have to volunteer in front of the whole group. Use anonymous writing, provide lots of means, and then continue to make it clear that whatever comes out of this, if your voice is missing, you aren't going to have influence on this decision. So you will have to live with it.
Yeah.
Please contribute. We're missing something. We need to know.
Yeah. Recently I don't remember where it was, in an online session, the facilitator came up with a suggestion: if you don't want your name next to your comment, if you want to anonymize it, then rename yourself into 3 dots. Leave your comment in the chat. And I thought this was brilliant. I haven't even thought about that.
Yeah, that's clever.
Right?
Yeah. It's a wonderful gift we have as facilitators in larger sessions where anonymity might actually work. And I work with business teams. I try not to rely on it too much, because when you're in a group of 4 or 5, you can use all the dots you want, Sally. We know that's you.
And also, if in a group of 4 or 5, you feel the need to anonymize your voice, then maybe you have other issues.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right.
Wonderful. If someone fell asleep after minute 2 of our conversation, just woke up and doesn't have time to listen to the entire show again, what would you like them to take away?
Bottom line up front. Yeah. If you're just trying to grab the key points, here's what I would say. If you want a successful business meeting culture, design your meetings as a system. So create a design and a structure for each of the meetings. Give your team time to practice them and get really good at it, and you will unlock everybody's success.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your experience, your insights.
Thank you for having me.
It's been wonderful. And yeah, I could talk about meetings until tomorrow.
I will probably, but not on this call. So it's really lovely to spend your afternoon with you.
Wonderful. And I will put the links to your website and to this abundance of resources that you share about online collaboration and online meetings. I will put all of that in the show notes.
That would be great. We host lots of free public workshops on all kinds of meeting topics that are appropriate both for facilitators and for business leaders. So definitely come check that out. We have an online community where we just chat about tips. So we would love to see you all there.
Wonderful. I will see you there. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention, as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.